They call it the most failed state on Earth. But that label hides something far more complex. Somalia has not had a functioning central government for over 3 decades, yet somehow, multiple competing power structures have thrived in the vacuum. Pirates, warlords, terrorist organizations, and clan militias have carved the country into zones of control so dangerous that even the United Nations requires armed escorts to deliver food aid. This is not a story about chaos. This is a story about order. Just not the kind the world recognizes. Because in the absence of a state, Somalia developed alternative systems of governance, justice, and economy that operate with brutal efficiency. And understanding how these systems work reveals something uncomfortable about power itself. By the end of this documentary, you will understand the mechanism that allows a country to function without a government, and why every attempt to rebuild the Somali state has failed. Answer has nothing to do with terrorism and everything to do with a social structure that predates the nation itself. The numbers are staggering. Since 1991, when the central government collapsed, an estimated 500,000 Somalis have died in conflict and famine. Another 2 million have fled as refugees. The country ranks last or near last on virtually every development index: life expectancy, literacy, infant mortality, access to clean water. The World Bank estimates that 73% of the population lives below the international poverty line of $1.90 per day. Yet Somalia continues to export livestock worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Its telecommunications sector is among the most competitive in Africa. Money transfer companies move billions of dollars in remittances from the diaspora with remarkable efficiency. The port of Mogadishu, despite decades of warfare, still handles international shipping. This is not a country that has ceased to exist. It is a country operating under radically different rules. The question every analyst has failed to answer is simple: why has no one been able to put it back together? Let's begin. The collapse of Somalia did not begin in 1991. It began centuries earlier, encoded into the very structure of Somali society itself. To understand why the country cannot be governed, you must first understand what Somalia is, and more importantly, what it is not. Somalia is one of the most ethnically and linguistically homogeneous countries in Africa. Nearly everyone speaks Somali. Nearly everyone practices Sunni Islam. There are no major religious divides, no language barriers, no ethnic minorities struggling for recognition. On paper, Somalia should be one of the easiest African countries to govern. Every nationalist theory suggests that shared language, religion, and culture create the foundation for stable statehood. Instead, Somalia has been ungovernable since its independence. The reason lies in a social structure that predates Islam, predates colonialism, and predates the concept of the nation-state itself: the clan system. Somali society is organized into a genealogical hierarchy of clans and sub-clans, each tracing descent through the male line to a common ancestor. There are 4 major clan families: the Darod, Hawiye, Dir, and Rahanwain, which together encompass dozens of sub-clans, hundreds of lineage groups, and thousands of extended family networks called Dia-paying groups. These Dia-paying groups, typically consisting of a few hundred to a few thousand men, form the fundamental unit of Somali political life. The Dia-paying group functions as a micro-insurance collective. If one member kills someone from another group, the entire Dia-paying group shares responsibility for paying blood compensation, traditionally 100 camels, though now often converted to cash. If one member is killed, the entire group shares the right to compensation or revenge. This creates a system of collective security where every man knows that his clan brothers will defend him, and every potential aggressor knows that violence against one individual means violence against hundreds. This system worked extraordinarily well for nomadic pastoralists moving across vast, ungoverned territories. But it created an impossible foundation for centralized statehood. Because in the clan system, loyalty flows upward through kinship, not downward from a government. A Somali man's primary allegiance is to his Dia-paying group, then to his sub-clan, then to his clan family. National identity comes last, if at all. When Somalia gained independence on July 1, 1960, merging British Somaliland in the north with Italian Somalia in the south, the new government inherited this system. The first decade was relatively stable, not because the state was strong, but because the government carefully balanced clan interests. Every cabinet position, every military command, every government contract was distributed according to a complex formula ensuring no single clan dominated. On October 21, 1969, this fragile balance shattered. Major General Mohammed Siad Barre seized power in a military coup following the assassination of President Abdi Rashid Ali Sharmarki. Barre was a member of the Marayhan subclan of the Darod clan family. His rise to power marked the beginning of a 21-year dictatorship that would transform clan rivalry from a traditional social structure into a mechanism of state terror. Barre initially declared war on clanism itself. He banned the use of clan names, prohibited traditional clan assemblies, and promoted a socialist ideology that promised to transcend kinship loyalty. In practice, he systematically concentrated power in the hands of three related Darod subclans: his own Marayhan, his mother's Ogaden, and his son-in-law's Dulbahante. Somalis began referring to this power structure as the MOD, Marayhan, Ogaden, Dulbahante. The revolution against clanism had become the ultimate clan dictatorship. The consequences were catastrophic. Between 1977 and 1978, Barre invaded the Ogaden region of Ethiopia, attempting to seize territory inhabited by ethnic Somalis. The war was a disaster. Somalia lost, and an estimated 1 million refugees flooded into the country from the Ogaden. But the military defeat was not the worst outcome. The worst outcome was what Barre did next. Unable to acknowledge his strategic failure, Barre blamed clan rivals for the defeat. In the north, he turned his military against the Isaaq clan family, which dominated the former British Somaliland. Between 1987 and 1989, government forces carried out a systematic campaign of violence against Isaaq civilians. Villages were bombed by aircraft. Water wells were poisoned. Livestock were slaughtered. Urban neighborhoods were shelled indiscriminately. Human rights organizations documented the destruction of entire towns. The city of Hargeisa, the second largest in Somalia, was reduced to rubble. Estimates of Isaaq deaths range from 50,000 to 200,000. Mass graves are still being excavated today. The campaign was so brutal that Somalis began calling it the Isaaq Genocide. And it revealed something crucial. In Somalia, the state was not an institution above clan politics. The state was simply the armed wing of whichever clan controlled it. By January 1991, multiple clan-based rebel movements had formed. The Somali National Movement represented the Isaaq. The United Somali Congress represented the Hawiye. The Somali Patriotic Movement represented the Ogaden. Each was fighting not for democracy or human rights, but for clan survival. On January 26, 1991, USC forces captured Mogadishu. Siad Barre fled the city, dying in exile in Nigeria in 1995. Somalia had no government. But more importantly, Somalia had no shared vision of what a government should be. Because the war had not been fought over ideology or political systems, it had been fought over which clan would control the instruments of state violence. And without a state to control, the clans simply continued fighting each other. What happened next defied every prediction. The world expected Somalia to descend into complete chaos. Warlords fighting over scraps, populations starving, all semblance of order vanishing. Instead, something else emerged. In the absence of a central government, Somalis reverted to pre-state systems of governance that had existed for centuries. And these systems, while unable to build a modern nation, were perfectly capable of organizing local life. But the economic network that sustained these local systems was only the visible part. The real infrastructure, the one that allowed Somalia to function without a state, was something international observers rarely discussed. And it was about to become the most sophisticated informal economy in the developing world. The telecommunications sector provides the clearest example of how Somalia functions without government regulation. In most countries, telecom requires massive state investment, licensing, spectrum allocation, and regulatory oversight. In Somalia, private companies simply built networks without asking permission from anyone. By 2002, Somalia had better mobile phone coverage than many African countries with functioning governments. Companies like Hormuz, Nationlink, and Telcom competed fiercely, driving prices down to among the lowest in Africa. A mobile phone call in Mogadishu cost less than a call in neighboring Kenya or Ethiopia, both of which had regulated telecom monopolies. How was this possible? The answer lies in the clan-based security system. Each telecom company negotiated directly with clan elders for permission to build infrastructure in their territories. Instead of paying license fees to a government, companies paid protection money to clans. Instead of government regulators resolving disputes, clan councils mediated conflicts between companies. The system worked because it aligned with existing power structures rather than trying to replace them. The same pattern emerged in every sector. Private airlines operated domestic and international flights without government aviation authorities. The port of Mogadishu was run by a consortium of businessmen who paid clan militias for security. Private companies provided electricity, though not through a centralized grid. Individual neighborhoods purchased generators and distributed power locally. The most remarkable example was the money transfer industry. Somalia has no central bank, no currency regulation, no formal banking sector. Yet billions of dollars flow into and out of the country annually through companies called hawalas. These are informal value transfer systems based entirely on trust. Here is how a hawala works. A Somali working in Minneapolis wants to send $300 to his mother in Mogadishu. He walks into a hawala office in Minneapolis and hands over the cash, plus a small fee. The hawala agent calls a partner in Mogadishu and instructs them to pay out $300 to the specified recipient. No money actually crosses borders. The hawala companies maintain running ledgers of who owes whom, periodically settling accounts through trade goods, property, or bulk transfers. This system has no legal enforcement mechanism. If a hawala agent steals the money, there is no government to prosecute them, no courts to sue in, no police to file a report with. Yet hawala fraud is extraordinarily rare. The reason?
We have much work ahead of us.
Clan reputation. Every hawala company is associated with a specific clan network. If one agent steals, the entire clan's business reputation is destroyed. The clan itself will often enforce repayment, because allowing fraud damages the economic interests of hundreds of their clan members. By 2009, the World Bank estimated that Somali remittances totaled $1.3 billion annually, equivalent to roughly 40% of the country's gross domestic product. This money sustained millions of people, funded local businesses, and kept the Somali economy functioning despite the absence of a state. If this kind of deep historical analysis interests you, subscribe to the channel. More investigations like this are coming. But this economic resilience created a paradox. The better Somalia functioned without a government, the less incentive anyone had to build one. Because a functioning state would mean taxes, regulations, and centralized authority, all of which threatened the decentralized, clan-based system that actually worked. And this paradox was about to collide with international intervention in the most catastrophic way possible. On December 9, 1992, United States Marines waded ashore at Mogadishu under the glare of television cameras. Operation Restore Hope, authorized by United Nations Security Council Resolution 794, deployed 28,000 American troops and an additional 17,000 personnel from 20 countries. The mission: deliver humanitarian aid to a starving population and restore order to Somalia. The intervention was prompted by genuine catastrophe. Between 1991 and 1992, an estimated 300,000 Somalis died from famine, much of it caused by warlords who blocked food aid to starve rival clans. The television images were apocalyptic. Skeletal children, overwhelmed feeding centers, bodies in the streets. Something had to be done. But the intervention was doomed from the beginning because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Somali politics. The international community assumed Somalia was simply a failed state that needed to be rebuilt. In reality, Somalia was a functioning stateless society that international actors were about to destabilize. The initial phase succeeded.
June 1993.
American troops secured ports and airports, established protected corridors for food distribution, and broke the famine. Death rates plummeted. By early 1993, the humanitarian emergency was over. But instead of declaring victory and leaving, the mission expanded. Under United Nations Security Council Resolution 814, passed on March 26, 1993, the mission transitioned from humanitarian relief to nation-building. UNISOM II, as the new operation was called, was tasked with disarming militias, rebuilding government institutions, and establishing a functioning Somali state. This was the fatal mistake. The United Nations identified Mohammed Farah Aidid, leader of a Hawiye subclan militia and chairman of the United Somali Congress, as the primary obstacle to peace. Aidid controlled much of Mogadishu and opposed any political settlement that did not guarantee Hawiye dominance. On June 5, 1993, Aidid's forces ambushed Pakistani peacekeepers conducting an inspection of a weapons storage site, killing 24 soldiers. The United Nations response was swift and catastrophic. Admiral Jonathan Howe, the American Special Envoy, issued a warrant for Aidid's arrest and offered a $25,000 reward. The mission feed starving Somalis had become a manhunt for a clan warlord, and Aidid, rather than being isolated, became a hero to many Hawiye who saw the United Nations as an outside force trying to impose a political solution favorable to rival clans. Throughout the summer of 1993, American Special Operations Forces conducted raids across Mogadishu searching for Aidid. The operations were technically impressive but politically disastrous. Every raid that killed civilians, and many did, turned more of the population against the intervention. Aidid remained at large, his support growing with each failed attempt to capture him. On October 3, 1993, the entire operation collapsed in a single afternoon. A force of 75 Army Rangers and Delta Force operators launched a raid to capture two of Aidid's top lieutenants in the Bakar Market neighborhood of Mogadishu. The mission was supposed to take an hour. It lasted 15 hours and became the most intense urban combat involving American forces since Vietnam. Two Black Hawk helicopters were shot down by rocket-propelled grenades. Somali militiamen and armed civilians converged on the crash sites. The outnumbered American force became pinned down, surrounded by thousands of fighters. A rescue convoy attempting to reach them was repeatedly ambushed, suffering heavy casualties. By the time Malaysian and Pakistani armored vehicles broke through the following morning, 18 American soldiers were dead, 73 were wounded, and 1 was captured. The Somali casualties were far higher. Estimates range from 300 to 1,000 dead, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire. But the strategic impact was entirely one-sided. Television footage of dead American soldiers being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu appeared on newscasts worldwide. President Bill Clinton announced that all American forces would withdraw from Somalia by March 31, 1994. The United Nations mission limped on for another year before collapsing completely in March 1995. The intervention had failed in every meaningful way. No stable government had been established. No militias had been permanently disarmed. No reconciliation between clans had been achieved. And the attempt to impose a solution by force had further discredited the idea of a centralized Somali state. The lessons drawn from the Somalia intervention would shape Western foreign policy for decades. The United States became deeply reluctant to commit ground forces to humanitarian crises, a reluctance that contributed to inaction during the Rwandan genocide just months later. The phrase Mogadishu effect entered the political lexicon, describing the unwillingness of democracies to accept casualties in conflicts where no vital national interest is at stake. But the most important lesson was ignored entirely. You cannot build a state by imposing it from outside when the society itself is organized around principles incompatible with centralized governance. The clan system had survived colonialism, dictatorship, civil war, and famine. It would survive international intervention as well. What the intervention did achieve was creating a power vacuum that would be filled by something far more dangerous than clan militias. Because in the chaos following the withdrawal of international forces, a new force was emerging. One that promised to transcend clan divisions entirely by imposing religious law through violence. And this force would transform parts of Somalia into genuine no-go zones for the first time in the country's history. The Union of Islamic Courts did not emerge from nowhere. Islamic law had always played a role in Somali society, operating alongside customary clan law. Traditional Somali elders applied zir, customary law governing everything from grazing rights to blood compensation. Islamic courts applied Sharia, religious law governing marriage, inheritance, and commercial contracts. The two systems coexisted, often addressing different types of disputes. But after the state collapsed and international intervention failed, Islamic courts began filling the vacuum. Starting in the mid-1990s, neighborhoods in Mogadishu organized Sharia courts as an alternative to clan-based justice. These courts offered something revolutionary, verdicts that supposedly transcended clan interests because they were based on divine law rather than clan custom. By 2004, multiple Islamic courts had formed a loose coalition called the Union of Islamic Courts. Each court was backed by its own militia, but unlike clan militias, these forces claimed to fight for religious principles rather than kinship interests. In practice, the distinction was blurry. Most court militias were still organized along clan lines. But the religious framing gave them legitimacy beyond their own clan networks. The court's most significant achievement was security. In a city where clan militias controlled different neighborhoods and roadblocks extracted tolls from travelers, the Islamic courts offered protection to anyone who accepted Sharia rule. They shut down illegal checkpoints, hunted down bandits, and enforced strict public order. For the first time since 1991, ordinary Somalis could move through Mogadishu without fear of being robbed or killed. By June 2006, the Islamic courts had defeated the Alliance for the Restoration of Peace and Counterterrorism, a coalition of warlords backed by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. The courts took control of Mogadishu and most of southern Somalia. The airport reopened. The port operated without piracy. Street crime virtually disappeared. Residents could, for the first time in 15 years, leave their homes at night without armed guards. But the Islamic courts were not a unified organization. They were a coalition of different factions with different ideologies. The moderate wing, led by Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed, favored negotiation with the transitional federal government and gradual implementation of Sharia. The hardline wing, led by Sheikh Hassan Dahir Awais, demanded immediate implementation of strict Islamic law and rejected any compromise with secular authorities. The most radical faction called itself Al-Shabaab, Arabic for the youth. Founded in 2006, Al-Shabaab was led by Ahmed Abdi Godane, also known as Mukhtar Abu Zubair, a militant who had trained in Afghanistan and embraced global jihadist ideology. Unlike the broader Islamic courts movement, which focused on governance within Somalia, Al-Shabaab aligned itself with Al-Qaeda's vision of worldwide jihad. The court's rise alarmed both the Ethiopian government and the United States. Ethiopia, a historically Christian country with a large Muslim population, feared Islamist influence on its doorstep. The United States, in the midst of the global war on terror, saw Somalia becoming a safe haven for Al-Qaeda operatives. On December 20, 2006, Ethiopian forces invaded Somalia with tacit American support. The invasion shattered the Islamic Courts Union. Within 2 weeks,
caught the world's attention and tested
Ethiopian
international
tanks had
resolve.
captured Mogadishu. The court's militias melted away, unable to face conventional military force. But instead of destroying radical Islam in Somalia, the Ethiopian occupation radicalized it. Al-Shabaab, which had been a relatively small faction within the broader Islamic courts movement, transformed into an insurgency. The group portrayed the conflict as a religious war, Christian Ethiopia invading Muslim Somalia. This narrative resonated powerfully, allowing al-Shabaab to recruit across clan lines in a way no previous Somali movement had managed. Between 2007 and 2009, al-Shabaab seized control of large portions of southern and central Somalia. The group imposed an extreme interpretation of Sharia law in areas under its control. Music was banned. Cigarettes were banned. Women were forced to wear full-body coverings. Cinemas were shut down. Sports were forbidden. Public executions and amputations became routine. Al-Shabaab's brutality was systematic and visible. In the town of Kismayo, the group stoned a 13-year-old girl to death for alleged adultery. She had been raped by 3 men but was the one executed. In Beledweyne, they publicly amputated the hands of teenagers accused of theft. In Mogadishu, they assassinated aid workers, journalists, and government officials in a campaign designed to create terror. But al-Shabaab was not simply a terrorist organization. It was also a governing authority that provided services in areas under its control. The group established courts that settled disputes quickly and without bribery, a stark contrast to the corrupt officials in government-controlled areas. They built infrastructure, dug wells, and cleared roads. They imposed taxes but also ensured security, eliminating the banditry that plagued government territories. This combination of brutal enforcement and functional governance gave al-Shabaab a degree of popular support, particularly in rural areas where the central government had never provided any services. Many Somalis did not necessarily agree with the group's ideology, but tolerated its rule because it provided order. And this created a strategic dilemma for counterterrorism forces. Al-Shabaab was not just a military problem, but a governance vacuum that the weak central government could not fill. By 2011, al-Shabaab controlled approximately 40% of Somalia's territory. The group had declared formal allegiance to al-Qaeda, transforming from a local insurgency into part of a global jihadist network. And it had created the first genuine no-go zones in Somalia, areas where the government had no presence, where international aid organizations could not operate, and where al-Shabaab's interpretation of Islamic law was enforced through systematic violence. Yet even at the height of its power, al-Shabaab could not escape the clan dynamics that shaped all Somali politics. And the internal contradictions within the movement were about to trigger a violent fracture that would reshape the insurgency and reveal something crucial about why even transnational terrorist organizations cannot fully transcend Somalia's social structure. Al-Shabaab's greatest strength was also its fatal weakness. The group claimed to offer an ideology that transcended clan divisions, uniting Somalis under the banner of Islam. But in practice, the organization replicated clan tensions within its own ranks, and these tensions would ultimately tear the movement apart from within. Ahmed Abdi Godane, al-Shabaab's emir, was from the Isaaq clan family. His deputy, Mukhtar Robo, known as Abu Mansour, was from the Rahanwain. The group's military commander, Ibrahim Haji Jama, known as Ibrahim al-Afghani, was from the Hawiye. Each brought with them networks of fighters from their own clans, and each maneuvered for influence within the organization using both ideological arguments and traditional clan alliances. By 2012, these tensions had become critical. Godane represented the internationalist wing of al-Shabaab, prioritizing the group's alliance with al-Qaeda and supporting attacks beyond Somalia's borders. Robo led the nationalist wing, arguing that al-Shabaab should focus on establishing an Islamic state within Somalia rather than pursuing global jihad. The dispute was ideological, but it mapped perfectly onto clan rivalries. In June 2013, Godane made his move.
In 1998,
In a series of coordinated actions, he ordered the assassination of Ibrahim al-Afghani and other senior commanders who opposed him. Robo fled and eventually surrendered to the Somali government. Godane consolidated absolute control over al-Shabaab, purging the organization of anyone who questioned his authority. The purge weakened al-Shabaab militarily, but made it more ideologically extreme. Godane doubled down on the group's alignment with global jihad, launching high-profile terrorist attacks beyond Somalia's borders. On September 21, 2013, al-Shabaab gunmen stormed the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya, killing 67 people in a 4-day siege. On April 2, 2015, the group attacked Garissa University College in Kenya, killing 148 students. These international attacks brought intensified military pressure. On September 1, 2014, an American drone strike killed Godane in southern Somalia. The United States military had been hunting him for years, and his death was hailed as a major victory. But al-Shabaab did not collapse. Instead, it adapted. The group's new emir, Ahmed Umar, known as Abu Ubaidah, was even more secretive than Godane. He rarely appeared in public, communicated only through audio recordings, and delegated operational control to regional commanders. This decentralization made al-Shabaab more resilient to targeted killings. There was no longer a single leader whose death would cripple the organization. By 2015, al-Shabaab had been driven out of most major cities by the African Union Mission in Somalia, a multinational force of 22,000 troops from Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. But losing cities did not destroy al-Shabaab. It transformed the group back into a rural insurgency that controlled vast stretches of countryside while launching spectacular attacks in urban areas. The group's territorial control became fragmented but persistent. Al-Shabaab held no major cities but dominated the roads between them, collecting taxes from travelers and businesses. The group controlled most of the Juba Valley, large portions of Middle and Lower Shabelle regions, and significant areas of Bay and Bakul. In these territories, al-Shabaab operated as a shadow government, running courts, collecting taxes, and providing rudimentary services. The organization's financial system was remarkably sophisticated. According to a 2017 report by the Hiral Institute, a Somali think tank, al-Shabaab generated between $35 million and $50 million annually through taxation. The group taxed farmers on their harvests, businesses on their revenues, and transporters on goods moved through their territories. Failure to pay resulted in execution. Al-Shabaab also penetrated government-controlled areas through an elaborate intelligence network. The group collected taxes from businesses in Mogadishu itself, threatening owners and their families if they refused to pay. Government officials, police officers, and soldiers secretly worked for al-Shabaab, providing intelligence and facilitating attacks. In 2019, the former deputy director of Somalia's National Intelligence and Security Agency was arrested for being an al-Shabaab operative who had infiltrated the government. This dual presence, overt control in rural areas, covert networks in cities, made al-Shabaab impossible to defeat through military means alone. Recapturing territory did not eliminate the organization's ability to operate, and every government offensive created new grievances that al-Shabaab exploited for recruitment. The African Union forces, despite their numerical superiority and better equipment, could not pacify the countryside. The troops operated from fortified bases, conducting occasional raids but unable to hold ground permanently. And the forces themselves became part of the problem. Ugandan and Burundian troops were accused of looting, extortion, and human rights abuses. Kenyan forces were accused of collaborating with al-Shabaab in the illegal charcoal trade, which generated millions of dollars for the insurgency. By 2020, al-Shabaab had been fighting for 14 years. The group had lost ground, lost leaders, and faced sustained military pressure from multiple countries. Yet, it remained entrenched in rural Somalia, capable of launching devastating attacks in cities and seemingly impossible to eliminate. The question was no longer whether al-Shabaab could be defeated militarily. Clearly, it could not. The question was why it continued to survive despite overwhelming opposition. The answer lies in al-Shabaab's ability to exploit the same structural weaknesses that have plagued Somalia since independence. The group thrived in areas where the government provided no services, no security, and no justice. Al-Shabaab offered all three, albeit through brutal means.
The streets are tense.
And as long as the Somali government remained weak, corrupt, and dominated by clan interests, al-Shabaab would continue to present itself as a viable alternative. Everything described so far explains al-Shabaab's persistence and the creation of no-go zones in southern Somalia. What it does not explain is how the organization became intertwined with another phenomenon that made parts of Somalia dangerous in an entirely different way, and put the country on the map as a global security threat for reasons having nothing to do with terrorism. That phenomenon emerged from the collapse of the fishing industry and transformed the Gulf of Aden into the most dangerous waterway on Earth. On November 15, 2008, the Saudi oil tanker Sirius Star was hijacked 500 miles off the coast of Kenya, farther from shore than any pirate attack in modern history. The ship, carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil worth $100 million, was held for ransom for 2 months. The hijackers eventually received $3 million in cash, airdropped onto the deck in a waterproof container. The Sirius Star hijacking marked the peak of Somali piracy, a phenomenon that transformed the Gulf of Aden and the Western Indian Ocean into the world's most dangerous maritime region. Between 2005 and 2012, Somali pirates launched more than 1,000 attacks on commercial vessels, hijacking over 200 ships and holding thousands of seafarers hostage. Somali piracy is usually portrayed as pure criminality, desperate men in small boats attacking ships for ransom. But the phenomenon emerged from a specific economic and political context, and understanding that context reveals how state collapse creates opportunities for alternative economies that connect local actors to global markets in unexpected ways. Somalia has one of the longest coastlines in Africa, 3,300 kilometers of shoreline along the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. These waters are among the richest fishing grounds in the region, supporting tuna, lobster, and numerous other commercially valuable species. For centuries, Somali fishing communities sustained themselves through artisanal fishing using small boats and traditional methods. When the government collapsed in 1991, Somalia's exclusive economic zone, the 200-mile offshore area where a country has sovereign rights over marine resources, became unpatrolled and unenforceable. Foreign fishing vessels from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East moved into Somali waters, extracting fish on an industrial scale without licenses or restrictions. A 2005 study by Peter Lair of the University of St. Andrews estimated that illegal fishing in Somali waters cost the Somali economy $300 million annually. Industrial trawlers from Spain, France, Italy, South Korea, Taiwan, Yemen depleted fish stocks that Somali fishermen depended on for survival. The foreign vessels used drift nets and bottom trawling techniques that destroyed marine ecosystems. Simultaneously, other vessels used Somalia's unmonitored waters as an illegal dumping ground. European and Asian companies disposed of toxic waste, including radioactive materials, heavy metals, and chemical byproducts, off the Somali coast. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami washed ashore hundreds of barrels of toxic waste that had been dumped offshore. Somali communities reported increased rates of cancer, birth defects, and respiratory illnesses. Somali fishing communities organized to defend their waters. Groups of fishermen began patrolling the coast, confronting illegal trawlers and attempting to collect fees for fishing in Somali waters. They called themselves Badadinta Bada, saviors of the sea. The international shipping industry called them pirates. The transformation from coastal defense to criminal enterprise happened gradually. Early pirate actions targeted illegal fishing vessels and toxic waste dumpers. But fishermen quickly realized that commercial cargo ships and oil tankers were far more lucrative targets. These vessels carried valuable cargo, employed small crews, and their owners had insurance policies that made paying ransoms economically rational. By 2008, Somali piracy had evolved into a sophisticated business model. Pirate operations were organized into 3 specialized roles: First, the attackers. Young men who conducted the actual hijackings, usually armed with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Second, the technical experts, often former fishermen who knew how to navigate and operate captured vessels. Third, the negotiators, educated individuals who spoke English and handled ransom negotiations with shipping companies. The most successful pirate crews operated from Isle, a small coastal town in Puntland, Somalia's semi-autonomous northeastern region. Isle became known as the pirate capital, housing dozens of hijacked ships and crews at any given time. The town transformed economically. New houses were built, restaurants opened, and consumer goods flooded in. Piracy generated an estimated $150 million to $250 million annually for the Somali economy between 2008 and 2012. Ransom amounts escalated dramatically. Early hijackings netted tens of thousands of dollars. By 2010, the average ransom exceeded $5 million. The highest confirmed ransom was $13.5 million, paid in 2010 for the release of the South Korean supertanker Samho Dream. The human cost was substantial. Seafarers were held hostage for months or years in brutal conditions. They were beaten, starved, and psychologically tortured to pressure shipping companies into paying ransoms. Some hostages died in captivity from disease or mistreatment. Others suffered permanent psychological damage. The International Maritime Bureau documented 4,185 seafarers taken hostage by Somali pirates between 2005 and 2012. The economic impact was global. Insurance premiums for ships transiting the Gulf of Aden skyrocketed. Shipping companies rerouted vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding thousands of miles and millions of dollars in fuel costs to each voyage. The World Bank estimated that Somali piracy cost the global economy between $7 billion and $12 billion annually at its peak. The international response was unprecedented. By 2009, over 30 warships from the navies of the United States, European Union, NATO, Russia, China, India, and Japan patrolled the Gulf of Aden and the Somali coast. This was the largest multinational naval operation since World War II, and it represented a remarkable level of cooperation between countries that rarely coordinated military actions. Naval patrols reduced the number of successful hijackings, but could not eliminate piracy. The ocean area that needed protection was vast, approximately 4 million square kilometers, equivalent to the size of India. Pirates adapted by launching attacks farther from shore, using hijacked vessels as motherships to extend their range. By 2011, pirates were operating up to 1,000 miles offshore. The turning point came not from military action, but from changes in maritime security practices. Shipping companies began employing armed guards on vessels transiting high-risk areas. These security teams, usually composed of former military personnel armed with assault rifles and heavy machine guns, transformed the calculus of piracy. Pirates in small boats armed with AK-47s could not defeat professional security teams with superior weapons and defensive positions. Additionally, ships installed physical security measures, barbed wire, water cannons, citadels where crews could lock themselves in and maintain control of the ship even if pirates boarded. Insurance companies offered reduced premiums for vessels with armed guards and security measures, making protection economically rational. By 2013, successful pirate hijackings had dropped to near zero. The last major hijacking occurred on March 26, 2017, when pirates seized the oil tanker Eris 13. The vessel was released after clan elders in Puntland negotiated with the pirates, and no ransom was paid. The collapse of piracy transformed coastal Somalia again. Isle returned to poverty. Young men who had made fortunes from piracy found themselves without employment. Many joined Al-Shabaab, bringing with them experience in weapons handling, maritime operations, and logistics. The skills developed for piracy transferred directly to insurgency. The piracy phenomenon revealed something crucial about Somalia's no-go zones. The areas that generated pirates were not no-go zones because they were inherently lawless. They were no-go zones because the state could not extend its authority there, and in the absence of state authority, local communities developed alternative economic systems. Some of those systems, like clan-based governance and informal finance, were functional. Others, like piracy, were parasitic and violent. But all emerged from the same structural condition: the absence of a functioning state. Yet even as piracy declined and al-Shabaab remained contained, Somalia continued to generate humanitarian crises on a scale that dwarfed the political violence. Because the combination of climate change, environmental degradation, and weak governance had created a recurring cycle of drought and famine that killed far more people than terrorism or piracy ever did. And this cycle was about to produce the worst humanitarian catastrophe Somalia had experienced in decades. In November 2016, meteorologists identified the formation of a La Niña weather pattern in the Pacific Ocean. This climatic phenomenon typically brings drought to the Horn of Africa. But what followed over the next 18 months exceeded even worst-case predictions. The rains failed in late 2016. They failed again in spring 2017. By June 2017, Somalia was experiencing the worst drought in 4 decades. Riverbeds dried completely. Crops failed across the entire country. Livestock, the primary asset for 70% of Somalis, began dying in massive numbers. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that 6.2 million Somalis, more than half the population, faced acute food insecurity. Of these, over 1 million people were in catastrophic conditions, meaning they had exhausted all coping mechanisms and were literally starving. The drought triggered mass displacement. By February 2017, over 763,000 people had fled their homes searching for food and water. They converged on urban areas and displacement camps, where conditions were appalling. Makeshift shelters housed hundreds of thousands of people with no access to clean water, sanitation, or healthcare. Cholera erupted across the country. The disease, spread through contaminated water, causes severe diarrhea and dehydration that can kill within hours if untreated. Between December 2016 and August 2017, Somalia recorded over 78,000 cholera cases and over 1,100 deaths. The actual toll was certainly higher, as most rural deaths went unrecorded. Malnutrition reached catastrophic levels. The United Nations estimated that 363,000 children under 5 were acutely malnourished, with 71,000 in the most severe category. So malnourished that their immune systems had collapsed, and any infection could be fatal. Aid workers described children with visible ribs, distended stomachs, and hollow eyes who lacked the energy to cry. The drought was a natural disaster, but its impact was amplified by human systems. In areas controlled by al-Shabaab, the group initially banned international aid organizations from operating, claiming they were agents of Western governments. The ban prevented food aid from reaching millions of people in desperate need. Although al-Shabaab eventually relaxed restrictions, the delay cost thousands of lives. In government-controlled areas, corruption diverted aid. Food intended for displaced persons was stolen and sold in markets. Water trucks delivering emergency supplies charged extortionate prices. Local officials demanded bribes to allow aid organizations access to affected populations. Every layer of dysfunction increased mortality. The international response was substantial but insufficient. Donor countries pledged over $1 billion in humanitarian aid. Aid organizations mounted the largest relief operation in Somalia's history, providing food, water, medical care, and shelter to millions. But funding arrived slowly, and by the time resources reached remote areas, many people had already died. The most chilling aspect of drought was that it was entirely predictable. Similar drought patterns occurred in 2011, killing an estimated 260,000 people, including 133,000 children under 5. That famine was officially declared in July 2011. but warning signs had appeared months earlier. Aid organizations pleaded for funding when intervention could have prevented mass death, but international donors waited until bodies appeared on television screens before providing resources. In 2017, the same pattern repeated. Early warning systems identified the developing crisis in late 2016. Aid organizations requested emergency funding in January 2017. But major donor commitments only arrived after media coverage of dying children created political pressure. The famine was not prevented. It was merely responded to after it had already killed thousands. By late 2017, the crisis had subsided. Rains returned, crops recovered, and mass starvation receded. But the underlying conditions remained unchanged. Somalia's agricultural productivity was among the lowest in the world. Infrastructure for water storage and irrigation was virtually non-existent. Healthcare systems could not respond to epidemics. And climate models predicted that droughts would become more frequent and severe due to global climate change. The drought revealed a different dimension of Somalia's no-go zones. In these areas, access was not blocked by armed groups or pirates. It was blocked by the absence of basic infrastructure, the presence of epidemic disease, and the reality that large portions of the country were simply too remote, too dangerous, or too dysfunctional for aid organizations to operate effectively. And unlike military no-go zones, which could theoretically be cleared by force, these humanitarian no-go zones were products of structural poverty that would take generations to address. As the drought receded, international attention shifted away from Somalia once again. But within the country, one final transformation was underway. An attempt by the federal government to extend its authority into areas controlled by regional administrations and al-Shabaab. This effort would reveal whether Somalia's no-go zones were permanent features of the landscape or could eventually be integrated into a functioning state. The answer would determine not just Somalia's future, but provide lessons about whether failed states can ever be rebuilt. In February 2017, Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed, universally known by his nickname Farmajo, was elected president of Somalia. Farmajo was a Somali American who had worked for the New York State Department of Transportation before entering Somali politics. He ran on an anti-corruption platform and promised to extend federal government control throughout the country. His election generated genuine optimism that Somalia might finally be turning a corner. Farmajo's strategy was threefold: build a national army capable of replacing African Union forces, negotiate peace with al-Shabaab defectors, and assert federal authority over Somalia's regional states. Each element faced enormous challenges. The Somali National Army existed largely on paper. Various estimates placed its size between 10,000 and 20,000 troops, but these figures included ghost soldiers, names on payrolls who did not exist, allowing commanders to pocket their salaries. Those soldiers who did exist were poorly trained, irregularly paid, and often sold their weapons to insurgents to survive. Morale was catastrophic. Farmajo launched an effort to rebuild the army from scratch, focusing on creating elite units trained by American and Turkish military advisors. These units, particularly the Danab Advanced Infantry Brigade and the Gorgor Special Division, represented the first professional Somali military forces since the Civil War. By 2020, approximately 5,000 soldiers had completed advanced training. But building an army required money Somalia did not have. The government's annual revenue was approximately $500 million, barely enough to pay civil servants, let alone fund a military buildup. International donors provided some support, but insisted on conditions: anti-corruption measures, transparent budgeting, and human rights protections. The government struggled to meet these conditions while simultaneously fighting an insurgency. The second element of Farmajo's strategy, negotiating with al-Shabaab, produced limited success. The government established an amnesty program offering defectors protection, reintegration support, and sometimes cash payments. Several mid-level al-Shabaab commanders defected, bringing intelligence about the group's operations. Most notably, Mukhtar Robo, the former al-Shabaab deputy who had split with the organization, cooperated with the government. But Robo's cooperation ended badly. In November 2018, when he announced plans to run for president of Southwest State, one of Somalia's federal member states, the government arrested him. The move was widely interpreted as Farmajo eliminating a political rival. Robo's arrest destroyed the credibility of the defection program. If a high-ranking defector who cooperated fully could still be imprisoned, why would anyone else surrender? The third element, asserting federal authority over regional states, provoked the most serious crisis. Somalia's constitution established a federal system with regional administrations in Puntland, Jubaland, Galmudug, Hirshabelle, and Southwest State. But the relationship between the federal government and these regions was never clearly defined, creating constant disputes over power, resources, and clan representation. Farmajo's administration attempted to influence regional elections to install leaders loyal to the federal government. This strategy backfired spectacularly. In Jubaland, federal forces clashed with regional troops in August 2019. The confrontation killed at least 11 people and displaced thousands. Kenya, which backed Jubaland's president Ahmed Madobe, withdrew its troops from joint operations against al-Shabaab in protest. The confrontation with regional states revealed a fundamental problem. The federal government was trying to build a centralized state in a country where centralization had never worked. Every previous attempt to concentrate power in Mogadishu had triggered clan-based resistance. Farmajo's efforts were producing the same result, and the political crisis was diverting resources and attention away from fighting al-Shabaab. By 2020, Farmajo's term was ending, and his administration's accomplishments were limited. The Somali National Army remained dependent on African Union forces. Al-Shabaab controlled large rural areas and continued launching devastating urban attacks. Regional states were in open defiance of federal authority, and Somalia's recurring humanitarian crises showed no signs of abating. The February 2021 deadline for presidential elections came and went without a vote. Farmajo's attempt to extend his term triggered a constitutional crisis. In April 2021, fighting erupted in Mogadishu between forces loyal to the president and those supporting opposition leaders. For several days, it appeared Somalia might slide back into full civil war. International pressure forced a resolution. New elections were scheduled, and in May 2022, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, who had previously served as president from 2012 to 2017, was elected to a second term. Mohamud promised to learn from Farmajo's mistakes and focus on reconciliation rather than confrontation. But the structural problems remained. Somalia still had no functioning taxation system, no professional civil service, no independent judiciary. The government controlled Mogadishu and some regional capitals, but had minimal presence in rural areas. Al-Shabaab continued to operate as a shadow government in much of the south, and the clan system, which had shaped Somali politics for centuries, showed no signs of weakening. The most significant development came not from political reforms, but from military operations. In August 2022, the Somali government launched a major offensive against al-Shabaab in central Somalia. Unlike previous operations, which relied primarily on African Union forces, this offensive was led by the Somali National Army, with support from local clan militias. The offensive achieved surprising success. Government forces recaptured dozens of towns and villages, liberating areas that had been under al-Shabaab control for over a decade. The progress was driven partly by improved Somali military capabilities, but more importantly, by the participation of clan militias who had turned against al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab's taxation system, which had sustained the group financially, had become increasingly oppressive. The organization demanded a percentage of all economic activity, executed those who refused to pay, and killed clan elders who challenged their authority. By 2022, many rural communities had concluded that al-Shabaab's governance was worse than the weak federal government. The mobilization of clan militias against al-Shabaab demonstrated both the potential and limitations of Somalia's social structure. Clans could provide security and governance in their territories more effectively than any central government. But clan-based governance was inherently local and particular. It could not scale to build national institutions. Somalia was making military progress, but that progress was achieved by empowering the very clan system that prevents state building. As of late 2024, al-Shabaab remained a potent force despite territorial losses. The group continued to launch complex attacks in Mogadishu, assassinated government officials, and maintained an extensive intelligence network. But for the first time in years, the organization was genuinely on the defensive, losing territory and struggling to maintain control over rural populations. Somalia's no-go zones were shrinking but had not disappeared. Large areas of southern Somalia remained under al-Shabaab control. The government's presence in recaptured areas was minimal, often just a military outpost with no civilian administration. And recurring droughts continued to create humanitarian emergencies that made development impossible. The question facing Somalia was no longer whether the country would collapse entirely. It had survived 3 decades without a functioning state, and would likely continue doing so. The question was whether Somalia could build something resembling a modern nation-state, or whether it would remain a patchwork of clan territories loosely coordinated by a weak federal government in Mogadishu. Everything Somalia has experienced since 1991, the civil war, the piracy, the terrorism, the famines, the failed interventions, stems from a single structural reality. Somalia is a society organized around genealogical kinship trying to operate within a political system designed for centralized states. The two are fundamentally incompatible. The clan system is not primitive or backward. It is a sophisticated form of social organization that has sustained Somalis for centuries. It provides security, justice, and economic coordination in the absence of formal institutions. It creates powerful bonds of mutual obligation that transcend individual interest, and it is remarkably resilient. It survived colonialism, dictatorship, civil war, and international intervention. But the clan system cannot build a modern nation-state. It cannot create institutions that govern impersonally. It cannot establish the rule of law that applies equally to everyone. It cannot generate the taxation necessary to fund public goods. And it cannot prevent violence when clan interests conflict. Every attempt to impose a centralized state on Somalia has failed because it tried to replace the clan system rather than work with it. Colonial authorities treated clans as obstacles to modernization. Siad Barre's dictatorship tried to eliminate clanism through repression. International interventions assumed that building state institutions would automatically generate loyalty to the state. All of these approaches were based on the assumption that the clan system would wither away if given the right incentives or the right pressure. But the clan system is not going away. It embedded in Somali language, culture, and social practice. Every Somali child learns their genealogy going back 10 or more generations. Every economic transaction is mediated through kinship networks. Every marriage reinforces clan alliances. Every dispute is resolved through clan mediation before any formal court is involved. The clan system is not a relic of the past. It is the living infrastructure of Somali society. The only successful governance structures in Somalia are those that align with the clan system rather than opposing it. Somaliland, the self-declared independent state in northern Somalia, has achieved relative stability precisely because its government incorporates clan elders into formal decision-making. The traditional council of elders, called the Gurti, functions as an upper house of parliament with the authority to mediate clan conflicts and veto legislation. Somaliland is not a democracy in the Western sense. Clan elders are not elected. They hold their positions through traditional authority. Women have minimal representation. Minority clans face discrimination. But Somaliland has maintained peace for over 20 years, held multiple elections without violence, and built functional government institutions. It works because it does not try to eliminate the clan system, but instead channels it into formal structures. The lesson from Somalia is uncomfortable for international development theory. State building cannot follow a universal template. What works in societies with weak kinship ties and strong individualism does not work in societies organized around clan loyalty. And imposing institutional models from outside, no matter how well-intentioned, often makes things worse. Somalia's no-go zones exist because the international community defined governance in ways that are incompatible with Somali social organization. Areas controlled by al-Shabaab are called lawless, but they have law, Sharia law enforced by clan-backed militias. Areas without government presence are called failed, but they have governance, clan councils settling disputes and organizing collective action. The zones are no-go, not because they lack order, but because they have a different kind of order that does not align with state sovereignty. The future of Somalia will not be determined by military victories or political reforms. It will be determined by whether Somalis can create hybrid institutions that combine the security and legitimacy of the clan system with the capacity for collective action that modern states provide. This requires abandoning the assumption that Somalia should look like other countries. It requires accepting that governance can take forms that do not fit international norms. And it requires patience measured in generations rather than election cycles. As of 2024, Somalia remains fragile, violent, and desperately poor. But it also remains functional in ways that external observers rarely acknowledge. Somalis send their children to private schools because there are no public ones. They use private healthcare because public hospitals do not exist. They rely on clan-based security because the police cannot protect them. And they navigate this system with remarkable sophistication, creating economic value and social order without the infrastructure that development theory says is necessary. The world's most dangerous no-go zone is not simply a place where government authority has collapsed. It is a place where the fundamental assumptions about how human societies should organize themselves are being tested. And the test has produced a result that contradicts the dominant narrative. States are not the only form of political organization capable of sustaining complex societies. They are simply the form that the international system recognizes as legitimate. Somalia will eventually rebuild some form of state. But that state will not look like Kenya or Ethiopia or any other centralized nation.
It will be a hybrid structure that formalizes clan governance while creating mechanisms for coordination across clan boundaries. It will be messy, inefficient, and plagued by corruption and violence. But it will be Somali, built on the social structures that have sustained the society for centuries rather than imposed from outside. And when that happens, the no-go zones will disappear, not because external forces pacified them, but because Somalis found ways to integrate them into governance structures they actually accept.